My daughter, Leela, was a light I didn't know I needed until she arrived. She came into this world with her tiny fingers gripping mine like she'd known me for lifetimes, and from that moment on, my world shifted. Everything about her radiated warmth. Her laugh could make strangers smile, and her heart was so pure it almost hurt to look at her sometimes. She loved big, and she lived with wonder. She'd stop mid, walk just to admire a caterpillar, or ask me why the sky changed colors at dusk. People say all children are special, but Leela, she was magic. Even my parents, who had always been lukewarm at best in their affection, seemed to soften around her, at least in the early years. I held on to that. I clung to any scrap of connection they offered, hoping one day they'd treat me and my child the way they doted on my sister Claire and her two boys. But life rarely gives you symmetry. When Leela turned 6, she started getting sick more often. At first, it was nothing major. Little things like colds that lingered too long or fevers that didn't make sense. Then it escalated. We were in and out of urgent care, pediatricians, specialists. I spent hours on Google, sleepless nights, watching her chest rise and fall, terrified that one day it wouldn't. Eventually, we got a diagnosis that felt like a knife through my chest. A rare autoimmune disease, aggressive and relentless. Treatments began, the hospital became our second home, and through all of it, Leela smiled. She smiled when she lost her hair. She smiled when she was too weak to sit up, but insisted on FaceTiming her class to show off her hospital socks. She smiled even when I was breaking inside. My parents, they visited once, one time in 2 years. They said the hospital made them uncomfortable. But when Claire's son broke his arm, they camped out at the ER all night, bringing balloons and ordering Uber Eats for the nurses. I said nothing. I swallowed my pride because I didn't want to take up space with my own pain. All that mattered was Leela. She deserved joy. She deserved peace. And as long as she was alive, I was going to give her. Both. Leela passed away on a Thursday morning. The air was still, like the world itself had paused to honor her. I had just made her a cup of tea, the kind she liked with honey and a hint of cinnamon, and I remember calling her name softly, expecting her usual sleepy smile. But she didn't move. Her little body was still, too still, and the moment I touched her, I knew. My scream must have echoed down the block. The hospital confirmed what my heart already knew. Her little body couldn't fight anymore. They said it was peaceful, painless, but those words were meaningless in the storm of my grief. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I held her in my arms for what felt like hours, unwilling to let her go. In the chaos that followed, I moved through the motions like a ghost making arrangements, calling family, planning a funeral for a child who still had glitter stickers on her bedroom walls and half-finished drawings taped to the fridge. I dreaded the phone call to my parents. I still remember how shaky my hands were as I dialed. My mother answered. I told her through sobs that Leela was gone, that the funeral would be held in 4 days, and that I needed them. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, sweetheart, we've already booked a trip with Claire. It's a non-refundable cruise. It's been planned for months." My father chimed in from the background, saying, "And besides, these things are always so sad. It's not like we didn't love her, but being there won't change anything." I stood there, stunned, phone in hand, breath caught somewhere between heartbreak and rage. They weren't coming. They were going on a $13,000 vacation to the Maldives with Claire, sipping champagne on a yacht while I buried my daughter. And the worst part, they didn't even sound sorry. There was no emotion in their voices, no hesitation in their decision. Just inconvenience, like my child's death was messing up their calendar. They said they'd send flowers, maybe a card. They said Claire's kids needed the vacation after a rough school year, that it would be too depressing to attend a funeral for a 10-year-old, that I should focus on healing instead of dragging everyone into sadness. After that call, something in me broke, quietly like glass cracking under pressure, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the kind of way that changes a person for good. I didn't cry again that night. I just sat in Leela's room, tracing the little fingerprints she'd left on her dresser mirror and staring at the rainbow drawing she'd taped to the wall weeks before she passed. That was the moment I knew I was completely alone. The people who were supposed to be my support system, My parents, my only family left, had made a choice, and it wasn't me. It wasn't my daughter. They chose comfort, sun, kissed beaches, and luxury cocktails over grieving with their own flesh and blood. That's when the anger began to take root. Not hot and wild, but cold and patient. I thought about every moment they dismissed me growing up. Every time Claire was praised, and I was brushed aside. Every time I had to watch my daughter wonder why her grandparents barely remembered her birthday. I'd made excuses for them my whole life. I told myself they didn't mean to hurt me, that they were just old, fashioned, or overwhelmed or closer to Claire because she was more put together. But none of that mattered anymore. When someone shows you who they really are in your darkest moment, you don't unsee it. I started replaying conversations in my head, remembering times when my mother had downplayed Leela's illness, calling me dramatic, or saying I was too focused on making people feel bad for us. I remembered how my father once told me not to expect too much because life isn't fair and it's best not to dwell. It had all been there, in the background like static, and I had trained myself to tune it out. But now I heard every word clearly. I started withdrawing, not just emotionally but physically. I stopped replying to texts. I ignored calls. I turned off location sharing. I needed space to grieve, yes, but also to think, to process and to plan, because while I wasn't sure exactly what form it would take, I knew I was going to do something, not out of spite, but out of necessity. My daughter had mattered. Her life had meant something. And if the people who should have stood up for her didn't care enough to even attend her funeral, then they didn't deserve to be protected from the truth anymore. I started by going completely silent. No confrontations, no angry messages, just silence. I knew my parents hated that more than anything. They liked drama because it gave them the chance to play the victim. Silence that denied them the spotlight, so I gave it to them in full. I stopped responding to their messages, ignored their voicemails, and when they finally sent a card, hoping I was feeling better, I didn't even open it. I put it in a drawer with the others, a quiet little graveyard of hollow apologies. Then I turned my focus to something that mattered, Leela's memory. I used what little savings I had to start a butterfly garden at her school, just like she always dreamed of. I worked with her teachers, her classmates, the parents who had actually shown up when I needed someone. We planted wildflowers, built benches, and installed a plaque with her name. I set up a small website to raise funds for children with autoimmune conditions, sharing Leela's story with honesty and heart. Within weeks, people started donating. Local parents, small businesses, even strangers from across the country who read her story and said they saw their own child in her smile. And with every dollar raised, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of purpose, of justice. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Claire, my sister, reached out, not to apologize, not to grieve. She wanted to feature Leela's foundation in a PR campaign for her firm. She framed it like a favor, like I should be grateful. I was stunned at her audacity, but instead of yelling, I asked for her pitch in writing, and when she sent me the proposal, full of branding jargon and buzzwords about hopeful optics, I posted it anonymously at first on a parenting forum. The reaction was immediate. People were furious. They called it exploitation, performative grief, narcissism wrapped in charity. Claire's name started trending, and not in a good way. Her biggest sponsor pulled out, and within weeks, her firm began crumbling. Meanwhile, local news caught wind of Leela's story. They invited me to speak at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. I stood on stage, shaking but determined, and told the truth. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The absence of my family in every chapter of the story was louder than anything I could have said. Grief has a way of peeling back every layer of illusion. It exposes who people truly are, who shows up, and who vanishes. My parents made a choice the day they booked that vacation. They chose comfort over compassion, image over integrity, and Claire's luxury over Leela's legacy. And in doing so, they severed whatever was left of our bond. But I didn't let their absence define the story. I rebuilt, quietly and deliberately. I channeled every ounce of pain into purpose. Leela's name lives on, not through expensive trips or hollow words, but through the garden where children play, the hospital wing that bears her name, the lives her story continues to touch. My revenge wasn't fire, it was truth. It was letting the world see exactly who they were and choosing never to protect their facade again. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to destroy. I just needed to remember who my daughter was and honor her in every way they refused to. And in doing that, I found peace. Not because justice was served, but because I gave my daughter the dignity, love, and remembrance that she so deeply deserved. That's all she ever needed, and that's something no one, not even her grandparents, could ever take away.